Welcome back to CodingCat.dev, where we give you cats the freshest dose of dev snacks. Brought to you by Cloudinary, build faster with AI-powered image and video APIs. Need better search? Try Algolia, powering discovery. Woo woo! What's going on, Corbin?
Hey, how you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. I'm struggling because it's been a minute since I've recorded podcast. I had a lot that have gone out, and like you're my first in a minute because I've been traveling for work so much.
You know, it's funny because I was literally just about to say that this is the first podcast I've been a guest on in a little bit. So I'm going to be like, I stream a lot, so you think it wouldn't be that different, but like, sure enough.
On that side, like when I go on and guest, I'm always like, oh, where are all my buttons? And like what, like I usually control the flow. What's happening right now? And so it's always super challenging. But again, welcome, Corbin. Really appreciate you coming on. We're going to talk all about WebDev Fundamentals today. And to get started, though, we always kind of break it down and want to get more to know about Corbin. So it's always human first and then tech later. So I'd love to hear more. I know you're at Descript now, but I want to go way back, like college years, Corbin, into all of this. So let's break down who you are, Corbin.
Sure. So college years is a very short chapter of my life. Actually, education in general is a pretty short chapter of my life. I did high school for a year and a half, dropped out, and then tested out after I dropped out, which is like a fun story. And then I immediately started community college at, what was that, 16? Like 15, 16, late 15?
Yep.
And then at the same time, I was interning at a high school as one of their tech people because they were like a charter school. So they were like a bootstrap startup type of deal.
Nice. I got to pause on the like year and a half of high school for a second. Like how did it come to be where you're like, I'm out, like, and have like the knowledge to like know like you needed a GED or whatever it is that you actually got, like to get all of that too.
So this is going to be a darker answer than you're going to expect.
Okay. We can always edit if you want, but like I'd love to hear it.
No. I legitimately love telling the story. Because I think it is very human. Because I agree with you. Like I think that far too often, like we get caught up in the tech scene, and it's like people, So I have schizoaffective disorder, which is schizophrenia and bipolar.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And around the time of high school, I had a suicidal bout, so to speak.
Sorry to hear that.
And I was inpatiented for about a month after an attempt, and then I was outpatiented for another month. And as a result, you don't really catch up from missing 2 months of high school, right?
Totally.
And it doesn't help that a couple months later, my grandfather was given a month to live, and he was very much a father figure to me at the time. Gotcha. So you got to imagine like a 15-year-old going through all this. Maybe
that's a lot of weight.
Even been 14. It was just a lot going on, right?
Yeah.
That was around the time I was diagnosed. It was around the time that I was really like coping and trying to comprehend what was going on in my mind and what reality meant, and like really heavy questions for a young mind. And it's funny because I obviously those memories and that experience even today, medicated and whatnot, has helped transform me into the person I am, and a lot of my side projects are driven because of that background.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily that I was like, oh, I'm gonna skip out on high school. It was more like high school was gonna skip out on me if I didn't do something else.
Totally. I mean, just the fortitude to like get through all of that and still come out the other side. I mean, I've met you in person. It's awesome to hang out with you. So like that on top of all the accomplishments that you've had and everything else, it's just amazing to see that kind of like stem from like a bad situation, all the good that seems to have come for you too. So
yeah, I mean, I know that this is like a bit of a deep jumping off point for a podcast episode.
Yeah. Welcome, folks.
Hey. But it's I feel very fortunate to be in the field, and it's a lot of the reason that drives me, like my family didn't have a ton of wealth growing up.
Sure.
So it's important for me to not only help people get into the industry, but also like for what little tiny beacon I can be to be like, look, you can do it. Like there's going to be inhibiting blockers, there's going to be challenges, but you can do it, and you can come out on top.
Yeah, that's a fantastic message. So so you make it through high school, like that's a crazy struggle. You started in community college, and then is that like your jumping point, or like that internship that you were talking about back in high school? What like kind of drove you into the field of computer science at that point?
Yeah, so I'd always been interested in computers from pretty young age. Like I was moderating an Android forum for a phone that I had at the time, and like Android ROMing it and whatever, you know. Um, and my big interest was originally design, not programming.
Okay.
So I had started this project called Material OS, which was like a collective of a bunch of designers coming together and making an icon pack based on the newly created material design from Google. Um, and we had a friend, her name is Evelyn. She created a website called Material Colorize,
Oh,
and she had happened to put my name on it just because we were friends, and I was like hanging out in a voice call while she was making the website. And jump forward a few years, I'd been doing programming for that high school that I had interned for, that had turned into a full-time job. And I got a call, it was a Twitter DM, and it was like, hey, we saw your name on a website that blew up on Reddit. Do you want to come work for us? Like, do you want to like come interview with us? And I had no idea how to do web development at the time. But you know, they hired me at minimum wage,
yeah.
and that was the start of my web dev career.
I mean, that's incredible when
Yeah,
like someone is chasing after you and not the other way around. That is
yeah.
always an amazing kind of place to end up. I
Well, and
think
it's funny because it wasn't even my work that they were fond of. You know, it was my friend's work that happened to slap my name on it. Thank you, Evelyn, for my career.
I did not find the website, but I think I found the GitHub page.
That's
So
the one. Our domain is down right now. We just took it down recently, but yeah.
that's pretty sweet to kind of like get pulled out of oblivion into this world. That's really sweet.
Yeah.
So
Fun fact
next
about
step,
the CEOSS there. So the GitHub domain is CEOSS Material Colorize. The CEOSS is Corbin Evelyn Open Source Software.
that's so
So we
cool.
had a little like organization going on there
I
for her
love
and
that,
I
man. That's such a
collaboration.
cool story. Wowzers. So from there, like I know you've kind of done your own thing, but that kind of came later still, right?
Yeah.
Did you jump like directly into your next job after that? What did that look like?
So I stayed at that web company for about 2 or 3 years. They were called Link Software, and they've since gone under, unfortunately. But through that time, I ended up leading their front end development team just because no one else wanted to touch front end, and I happened to know it like reasonably well because I studied for it a lot, you know. And I started doing internship, or not an internship, but a like a part time gig at a boot camp. And this boot camp was really like a huge turning point for me because I learned there that I love teaching, just absolutely adored teaching other people. And it helped solidify my knowledge as well. So it was like a bit helping others, a bit selfishness, right?
Yep.
Which I think, you know, most good things have a little bit of one or the other, you know, or sometimes both.
I think you have to do it that way. I mean, I hang out with James Quick and crew and learn, build, teach. I mean, we talk about it
Yeah.
all the time. And like, if you're not constantly learning and improving, like you can't teach it either. Like,
Yeah,
I think we all had those
exactly.
teachers in high school. They weren't teaching us anything. So,
Exactly. And
and so that did that kind of give you the bug for like the rest of your career and what you're doing now too?
right. So it's funny because it gave me the bug of education,
Yeah.
and then there was like the flip side of this where like they were kind of scamming students in my opinion. Like
Oh,
it was a kind of nasty situation where they were like charging a ton of money and promising way too much that they couldn't follow through on. And I was like, why are we doing this in like such a enterprisey like slimy environment, right?
sure.
Like why don't we open source some of this, you know, because I'd obviously been involved in a lot of open source projects at that point. Why don't we open source this education model and like really bring as many people in as we can? And that's when I started Unicorn Utterances, which is soon to be rebranded as Playful Programming, which we can
I
talk
love that
about at
name, by
any
the way.
point.
When you told me that, I'm like, that's cool.
Yeah, pretty excited about that.
What's the mascot? Is it still gonna be a unicorn?
Still gonna be a
Okay.
unicorn. Oh yeah, we voted to keep that one in for sure.
I love that. That's so cool. And you had
Um,
like you freelanced at some awesome places. When I was checking out your LinkedIn page to kind of do some history and some
yeah.
searching on you. I mean, you've been at Astro, you've been at Clerk. Those are all top places to go in at. Can you tell me a little bit about your experience just like working with those different places and what you were doing?
Sure, yeah. So for reference, those have been my consulting contracts. So they've been relatively short, 1
Yep.
to 3 months. In fact, most recently, I've actually been working with Replay.io to revamp their documentation, and that's mostly what I do for my consulting. I'm happy and love doing development, and you can consult me to do that as well. But I really shine in developer education and like making sure that your documentation is structured properly, that people are able to jump in, get into your product, and start like running with it.
That's cool. We just did a pod, which is out there now, turning documentation into a project with Vincent G from, I worked with him at Apparate before. And like, I think people undervalue or like don't realize the
Yeah.
importance of documentation. And as like a DevRel, it's like, if not half, more than half of my job is spent thinking about docs, writing
Mhm.
examples and stuff like that. So it's challenging for sure.
Yeah.
And then, like, all the way up to present day, I know more recently you started at Descript. What's that been like?
It's been really exciting. Shout out Andrew L, who was the one who referred me and hosts his own wonderful podcast, DevTools FM. Shout out.
Good show, folks. I think it's in my podcast list that I need to update again.
Oh yeah, it's good stuff. But he referred me in, and he and I are working on the client platform team, so we're kind of like helping the developer tooling situation at Descript.
Nice.
So I've been upgrading React and Redux and all sorts of other tools. So it's been a lot of fun.
How much, like, I know you're mostly front end on that side of things, but like, how much are you having to deal with like AI in Descript on like front end? Is there like streaming that's occurring that you're gonna have to like update and things like that?
So if we think about like I really like to zoom out and like look at the really big picture.
Sure.
I tend to think about AI as like just another API, right?
Yep.
Whether that API is local on your computer or whether it's like remote, because a lot of people hear the word AI or API and they think, oh, that must be an HTTP server. But that's not the case, right? Like APIs can be a wide range of things.
Sure.
Like even reading from files can be considered an API of sorts, right? So there's latency, there's reliability and error handling, and all of those are going to be consistent regardless of whether you're using AI, regardless of whether you're using file systems. You have to handle these edge cases regardless of what API style you're looking at. So I don't tend to dive too deep into the like the machine learning aspects. But there's absolutely that like communication boundary that we maintain.
Love it. Well, we're going to take a quick break and pay the bills, and then we'll come back and dive more into WebDev Fundamentals with Corbin. So we'll be right back, folks.
Cloudinary allows you to remove any unwanted backgrounds, so you can reuse assets efficiently. You can also erase objects and people from images for placement in new experiences. For more engaging content, easily turn static images into dynamic animations, and rely on smart cropping to always deliver assets with a focus on the most relevant objects to your brand. Cloudinary Programmable Media. Build faster with AI-powered image and video APIs.
Algolia helps you create a search and discovery engine in 3 steps. Step 1, import your data. Import the API client, initialize the client in index, load the local JSON file, and then push to Algolia. Step 2, configure relevance. Define searchable attributes, add business metric, specify facets and filtering. And step 3, build your search UI, import widgets from the library, add instant search component, add search input, refine by attribute, display results, add pagination. And just like that, you're done. Build search effortlessly with Algolia.
Thank you, Cloudinary and Algolia, for not only sponsoring the podcast, but we use both Cloudinary and Algolia on codingcat.dev's website. So it's a huge help. I'm also a ambassador, or whatever the title is correctly. I think they keep flipping those around, but for both products, and love them both. Been using them for years. So huge thanks once again. All right, Corbin, we're going to dive back into WebDev Fundamentals. We got to learn a little bit about Corbin the first 10 minutes. Definitely check that out if you're just diving into this part. But like I think there's this little thing called framework.guide that you wrote. Is that fair enough to say?
Yeah, I think so.
Wrote, created, however you say that. Do you want to break that down a little bit, and then we'll kind of dive in even further?
Yeah, absolutely. So, framework.guide is also known as framework field guide, is a book trilogy that I'm currently writing. The first book is out. It teaches the fundamentals of componentization across your web development. So, whether you're using React, Angular, or Vue, whether you're a newcomer or like a super experienced professional who's looking to switch frameworks, and improve job stability, improve your knowledge on like what the underpinnings of each of these frameworks are. That's what the book series is here to teach you. The first book is about like, what was it, 512 pages when printed out on A4 paper, size 12 font. So it's like a hefty amount of content. It's interactive. We have code challenges, and we have a Discord community where people can come hang out and learn.
That's awesome. I want to show you guys the difference between me, a hack as a front end. So you'll see Coding Cat the hack, and then what he's done on this site. Let's see here. So this might not come through great on video, but I'll just talk through it a little bit. As you pan through, you're going to get different colors happening, but also, and this is the tough part. If I scroll slow enough, you see that. What's that called? It's something effect.
Parallax effect.
Thank you. The parallax effect. So the trees are kind of going higher through, the person's going up past the mountain. So this is what you get from a front-end developer. This is awesome. So it dives into these different colors. The one I love the most is down here. So when it turns to this, you can see clouds in green, and it turns to purple. That is so dope, man. I love this.
You know, there's one feature that I really want to highlight, just because we ended up smoking a professional website that I'd found. So scroll all the way to the top really quick.
Okay.
And then zoom out as far as you can, like 10% or whatever it'll let you do.
Holy smokes.
Notice how the background repeats, but the center image doesn't.
Oh yeah.
So there's a video game called Firewatch, and Firewatch has a similar effect, but they don't have the center that doesn't repeat. They repeat everything all the time. So I'm just like, yes, we managed to beat a video game, like a AAA Studios website.
So how do you actually get like the width? Does it just keep going after that? Like if I go like 4K up like
yeah, you really can. Yeah, you can go to 4K, you can go to projector size, you can do whatever you want. Yeah.
That's dope.
So the way that we do this is we have a non-JavaScript version that loads if you have JavaScript disabled, and then we progressively hydrate it with like Preact, depending on whether you have JavaScript enabled or not, because the color transition only works with JavaScript enabled. Okay. So we have to do Preact to like incrementally load some SVG elements and then change it back. It's like a little messy, but it works better than you'd expect.
I think it's awesome. It's a really cool site. So definitely go check out the first book. I know you're working on the next one, right? Ecosystem.
Yep.
What are you thinking? Like end of 24 that might be out, or further? I know these
probably going to be a little bit further. Yeah, that's the big problem, is that, like, you know, we talked about the rebrand of Unicorn Utterances to Playful Programming, and that's been taking up a little bit of time. I'm trying to finalize a TanStack form project that I'm working on. So unfortunately, I have my hands in many pots, and the second book has kind of taken a backseat for a little bit.
I think you just touched on something maybe you should dive into a little more. I didn't know this about you. I don't know why I didn't, but TanStack, you've kind of been a big part of that, right?
Recently. I definitely can't take credit for like query or table or virtual, but at least not until like the past year or two. But yeah, so sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna ask, are you doing like front end for the site too, or is it mainly just kind of repo stuff?
So I am creating. So I created config, which is how we package our like modules in order to publish to NPM. I helped create docs for TanStack Start, which is a new meta framework that's going to be competing with Next.js. I created TanStack Store, which is a like reactive signals implementation that we're using to power many of our libraries. And then I'm the core maintainer for TanStack Form, which is a form library from the TanStack community.
Nice.
So,
and forms are difficult. So
yeah, they are.
That's always a challenge. And TanStack, the cool part is like and correct me when I'm wrong, because I always forget on this stuff because I always think it's React first, but in reality, TanStack, every framework it can be used in, right?
Yeah. So if you hit get started there,
Yep.
and then you look at the framework dropdown, we're not even version 1 yet, and we already support React, Vue, Angular, Solid, and Lit.
That's dope.
In fact, the Angular adapter was code reviewed by the Angular team themselves when I went to NGConf this year.
That's awesome. That's really cool. Do you think like the Sveltes of the world and things like that, they'll be coming?
Yeah. So Svelte, we ran into an issue with Svelte 4. There were some challenges with the API that we wanted to have that like Svelte just wasn't quite ready for.
Sure.
So Svelte 5 will definitely have an adapter either prior to V1 or really shortly after V1.
Okay.
But the nice part about these adapters is that they're thin, super paper thin wrappers over the JavaScript core.
And for people like myself, like I use Next.js all the time. Is there a reason I would go with TanStack in Next.js, or is it kind of like one or the other?
So TanStack is an ecosystem, right? So we have like multiple different libraries that handle different things. And then there's TanStack Start, which is a competitor to Next.js. Right?
Okay.
So our ecosystem actually plays pretty nicely with Next.js. But Start is that like final stepping stone of like, all right, I'm ready to move on to the next thing. App router is either slow or buggy or, whatever you've ran into, right? Or maybe you just like the DX of Start a little bit more. It all depends.
Cool.
So, one of the benefits of using TanStack Form with Next.js is that you're able to have isomorphic form validation, which means that you have the same exact rules for your server and your client, and it will merge the UI together, whether you have JavaScript enabled or not.
Wow.
It'll show the same UI errors in the browser.
That's amazing. That's really cool.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Because like I said, and I think most people know, forms suck. Like
that
they're so hard to like keep updated, make sure they're correct. All the error messaging, the A11Y, like, oh my gosh, it's just crazy. So, all right, I jumped down a crazy rabbit hole there, but I had to like ask because I know it takes up a lot of your time too. When we talk about WebDev fundamentals, though, like where should people start and like, in your opinion, kind of get rolling with this stuff?
So I think that to start, what I will say is my opinion, right?
Oh.
I think that there are many, many, many paths that lead to gold, right? You can strike gold in a ton of different ways, whether you start with vanilla JavaScript, whether you start with Python, which is actually where I started, whether you start with a framework or not, there's a lot of different options out there. The one that I have decided to pursue in the book series is that, like, if you're trying to get a job quickly, right, you're most likely going to be wanting to look in React, maybe Vue, maybe React or Angular. But realistically, you're going to be using a framework at your day job, right? Unless if you're building marketing sites, if you're building high earner activity applications, you're using a framework in modern web development, right? So the challenge there, though, is that most people that learn these frameworks tend to be very project oriented, which is great. I love project-based learning. But the problem with project-based learning is that you tend to have very sparse knowledge sets, right? I know this piece over here, I know this piece over here, and this piece here, and they don't really connect together, right? And the problem is that when you do that, you're missing out on things like internationalization or accessibility or error handling or logging or, there's so many things that are vital, just absolutely mission critical to really high performance throughput applications that you're missing out on when you are self-educated like I have been.
I would say even like just having knowledge of those pieces, even if you're in project based and you only own this one little part and you don't need to know the rest, like it's important to at least understand like what everything else and somebody on another project is doing too.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I started writing the book series, one, I wanted to help newcomers have a streamlined path where they could learn like what is memory allocation? How does that play into front-end development? Because, a lot of people are like, oh, well, I don't have pointers and I don't have reference objects, therefore memory is free, which is not quite the case, right? So I tried my best to cover the like CS style fundamentals without going into like really deep. What does this word mean? What is a lambda null effect pointer? You know what I mean?
Yes.
So I try to keep things in simple English. I try to keep things grounded to reality, and not just like grounded to like what I perceive like applications can do, but like, why am I learning about this? How will it tangibly impact my applications? Our side effect chapter is something like 13 or 14,000 words long.
Wow.
And a lot of that is because I literally go through, why do you need to clean up a side effect? How does it, like, ignore memory, right? We have 1 billion trillion gigabytes of memory these days, but why do I need to clean up memory for bug reasons, right? So I showcase a few examples of why that might be the case. And then finally, there's a lot of people who maybe started with Angular or React or Vue that want to kind of pivot or kind of peek over the curtains and see what everyone else is playing with. So I thought that this was an interesting opportunity to like, hey, one, come learn the other one in a weekend, in an afternoon, in a week.
So I think like one of the things that I always tell people that like are just now getting started and want to learn, I always try to like drive them back towards the basics. So if you're going down the road of web development at all, you better know JavaScript and probably TypeScript right behind that too. So I'm always telling them, don't even touch a framework. Like, go learn JavaScript, go fetch your own DOM, whatever, a div off the DOM and edit it and put inner HTML in and like style it, like just not using anything. Feel the pain, understand what it's doing underneath. And then, like, to your point, like, you should be able to dive in and start to learn even further and expand from there. Have you found like people that have kind of started into your book? Is there like, there's always that, I wish I would have added X as they kind of learn through it?
So I'm going to go a step further from what you're recommending. Okay. One of my favorite assignments to give any mentees of mine is create a list application, a to-do application, right?
Yep.
And I want you to not use a framework, but I want you to have your code as dry as possible.
Oh.
Because what ends up happening is that people like will do like, okay, well, great, I have a for loop, and then it'll execute a create element, and then it'll inject the element, and they'll run into one of two problems. The first problem is that they'll like, oh, great, I've recreated the list. Wait, why is the list duplicating over and over? Right? So that's problem number one. And then they go solve that, maybe using like maybe a primitive key system, maybe using, some kind of tricks, right?
Yep.
And then what they end up doing is they re-render the entire list when they've edited one node inside the list, right?
Yep.
So I love that assignment because it's the very beginnings of building your own framework. Yeah. And it's like the ultimate, like, oh my gosh, the virtual DOM is awesome. Like even when the virtual DOM isn't that awesome, it's still awesome, right? So this is why I've structured my book series the way that I have, right? The first book literally doesn't use fetch. It literally does not use NPM modules outside of the frameworks themselves. You use just what's included in the box, right? The second book is everything else, right? All the node modules, all the routers and the queries and the blah, 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 right?
Yep.
And then the third book goes way off the deep end, and you're rewriting React, Anchor, and Vue from scratch, like no prerequisite code whatsoever, and building your own frameworks with that fundamental knowledge. Right? So it's interesting because it's almost backwards, right? The way that I'm teaching versus the way that you're proposing. Instead of going from vanilla JavaScript to a framework, I'm proposing to go from a framework, understanding why they've architected things these ways, and then going back and going, okay, now how exactly, not hand wavy, like line by line, code by code, how exactly does this function?
I think it's interesting too, because to your point, like I came out of college, I needed a job, I learned the job, and it's totally different than anything like I had learned before. I went from like web development, PHP, that side, directly into SAP. and started writing ABAP code, which is ridiculous, but like my heart of hearts in web development. So kind of like you, I'm basically self-taught web development. And so my first framework, other than jQuery, if we count that, my first framework jumping in was Angular 2, not even 1. Like I didn't want to touch one because it was so confusing to me. And now like over the course of years, like I've gotten to work with Mishko at Builder and things like that. And now like just starting to peel like pieces off this framework, the onion, and like actually realize how much work's probably the wrong word, but like how much magic frameworks take care of that I never knew, and learning it backwards the other way. Now I'm like, oh, like it's crazy to me. And of course, I've been doing it for 20 years. So that was a long time ago, learning all those ahas, but there's still today, like there's stuff that Svelte's doing. I was like, oh, I wouldn't even thought of that. And like, of course it's doing that under the hood. So it's kind of amazing to like, I always tell people it depends on how much and what you want to learn, because you could go way deep down into like the IV engine, the compiler at the base. Like you can keep going down one path your entire career and never care about like CSS. Like that's totally fine. That might be a different avenue, but I find it's really good to be like a very well-rounded person and learn at least enough so you can like talk to other people about what they're working on.
You know, it's interesting because I tend to guide newcomers in the industry to specialize, right? I think that if you're looking for the bigger jump, you know, in terms of seniority, in terms of pay, I think specialization tends to help. But I don't want, like when I tell people this, what I don't want them to take away is like, plug your ears and ignore everything else everyone else is doing, right? Like I have not touched a back end code base in some time, probably 5-6 years, right?
Wow.
But I understand how to architect a back end, right? And if you think about it, you know, earlier I was talking about how an API is kind of consistent regardless of how you look at it, right? And this is one of my favorite tricks is like, what is loading a variable from memory really doing? RAM isn't instantaneous, even though we feel like it's instantaneous sometimes.
Wait, it's not?
Yeah. It's just really, really fast, right? So you know, like you can really start to kind of like look through the pier glass or whatever the expression is, where, you know, you're able to understand that once you're architecting for the back end, you're architecting for a really complex front end, right? Like I'd written a Git client previously. That's a really complex application that requires nuanced file system management. That's not something you tend to touch on in front end, but those skill sets converge at some point, right? So having knowledge in some areas can really help you in your specialization, or even just being able to talk and understand why there is a problem at some point down the line.
Yeah, totally. The interesting part too, like as you build those skills out, have you ever heard of like the T-shaped person or the pattern? So I like to, when I'm teaching people, you know, we talk about the T, how like it's really great to know a little bit about a lot, and then like one area get really, really good in, like specialize in it. But then like if you're old and, you know, almost fully gray at this point, if you're like me, you start to realize it's almost more like a broken comb pattern. And what I mean by that is that you have this base, you have your one long tier. For me, like it's JavaScript, or like I could say APIs are like this. But then like I started to build out this React piece and this Angular piece. And like I know more about AWS Amplify because I worked on it. And like as you start to break those down, you start to have more. And I try to explain to people like that's super important too, because like in your next job, you never know like what the next thing will bring. And maybe that one thing you worked on, that's one of these like kind of longer pieces that you're building out, turns into your like ginormous long piece. So it's always important. Like I agree with you 100%, go specialize, but make sure you're like open to continue learning those other pieces as well.
Right. And something I found that's really interesting is that the shape of your T or your honeycomb doesn't stay the same.
No,
right?
it doesn't.
Like I don't remember how to do certain things in MongoDB, and I've written docs for MongoDB,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
That's an interesting problem to have, right? You stay in the industry long enough, you forget a lot of what you used to know. So one of the things that I really encourage people to do is whether they are writing blog posts, whether they're writing books, whether they're writing personal notes, catalog it.
Yep.
Right? Catalog it somewhere, and especially if
even
you're
if
able
you
to
don't want
catalog
it public, like just catalog
Right.
it for yourself so you can go back to it.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I'm a big proponent. Please put it public. We all
Yeah,
want to
I
hear
was
your
gonna
stuff.
say.
But like, if you just aren't ready for that yet, like, just keep it in a markdown file somewhere. That's fine.
Yeah. Big time, big time. My earliest variants of the framework field guide were just to-do comments
Yeah.
in some like markdown file that I just persisted across a couple of computers that I pulled up one day and went, huh, this is a good idea.
I mean, that's how all things start, I feel like. And then you start to put a little more structure around those like notes and
Yep.
things like that. And all of a sudden, yeah, you're in like full book mode, writing chapters and everything else. So
Yeah.
it's kind of amazing. What's the next piece for web dev that you would learn after you, let's say, know the language? Like, you know, JavaScript. Would you say to people, hey, learn like APIs, or like dive into a Next.js like framework where you can both write front end and back end at the same time, and you're kind of feeling that out? Is it databases? Like, where would you head next, right after like the to-do app you had people write?
So I really like I like having people rebuild the same thing multiple times. It's kind of like masochistic, but I love it, right? Like there's something to be said about having a Next.js app that runs reasonably well, right? But has re-renders. You know, you have your server-side hydration of the HTML, then the JavaScript executes, and then when the JavaScript executes, it rehydrates all of the components that are on there, right?
Yep.
Now React server components can help with that, but it never really fully goes away, right? So like you were suggesting, I really like this idea of taking an existing Next.js application and just being like, React was not invented yet. Go build something with jQuery, or go build something with no framework, or, you know, or you have this animation that's using JavaScript really heavily. How do you make it not use JavaScript? How do you make an animation using only CSS?
Oof.
Right? Because CSS is super powerful. You can build, I think it's even Turing complete. You can build whole programs using CSS if you wanted to. So I really like this idea of like making much with very little, and kind of like, now that you have this foundation of how to structure things, how do you structure things without the tools that you've been used to?
Yeah, that's a great way to kind of look at it. I think that gets back to some of it is kind of that you have that framework or that core and you know how it works, and then like you strip it away and like now you need to know the thing, right? Like that's
Right.
I hadn't thought about it that way, because like I find most developers like they love creating for the first time, but they don't love recreating, and I think that would force them into that for sure.
Well, and the other part of it that really gets your mind turning is that you start thinking, okay, well, you know, I know how the virtual DOM works, right? Like it's able to keep reference of how, you know, a component re-renders and then it persists state. Well, the way that it does that is just using an array, right? Like literally, if you use state internally in React, there's an array somewhere that is keeping track of the number of times you've called a hook in a component, and has a little bit of state associated with an index on the array item, right? Which is like mind-boggling that they made that work in professional environments, right? But then you start thinking about it and it's like, wait, maybe data mutability isn't bad, right? Like if you start thinking about functional programming and you start really diving deep into the theoretical, they teach you never mutate data. Don't do it. How could you? You're betraying your users, right?
Yeah.
But then you start realizing like, no, maybe I can leverage this in some instances, and maybe I can kind of pick and choose elements of FP and OOP, and, you know, like by rebuilding things multiple times, it forces you to reevaluate what you have been using and how you can leverage the existing tools in your tool belt, even when they aren't like, you can still use a screwdriver to hammer in a nail if you really need to.
Yeah, I mean, like, there's a lot of instances, like, I've just had that aha moment, even React, because I'm still, even though I've been writing React for a while, I still completely feel like a newbie on it, and, like, I go to use Memo or something like that, and I'm like, what is this actually doing? And, like, once you start to unpackage that and, like, where to use it, you're like, "Oh,
Yeah,
alright, like, this totally makes more sense." So, I think every layer you kind of start to peel off and you start to learn, that it's huge for sure.
yeah.
I'll ask you maybe a question that'll get me in trouble, but like, what is your favorite framework?
I get asked this one a lot. I was actually going to compliment you on not asking me this,
Damn
but
it.
then you had to go break this. No, I'm just kidding. Um, so, like anything, my opinions actually have changed on this, right?
Yeah.
I think that once upon a time I loved Angular, right? Like it was my number one top favorite.
Yep. Same.
And all of this is personal preference, that I don't think there's a wrong pick here really. And then as I was learning React, I was like, well, come on, React's top of the world, right? Like everyone's using React. And then I found Vue, and Vue just had like this, as soon as the composition API came out, it was just elegant and wonderful. Didn't have the limitations of hooks. And now Angular signals have come around, and now I'm like, oh, geez, it's really shifting my mindset again. So it's funny, there's also been players like Solid.js is a huge win. It's really the reason why we're talking about signals as much as we are today, really.
Totally. Yeah,
Shout out
Ryan
Ryan
pushed that
Carniato.
forward.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it's interesting too, though, like the ebb and flow, and I feel like the reason that we go through those is because like one of those frameworks has an awesome, maybe not idea, but like a implementation, and all the other frameworks go, oh, we missed this, and like they then implement it. And I think, what is it, all high tides rise all boats. I'll get it wrong there, but like everything makes everything better when there's competition, right? And I think that's what we're seeing happen. The interesting part to me is like now when I go to work on basically any framework, especially with like Astro and stuff, or not Astro, what's the Vite, when like Vite's like building almost everything under the hood when you're running in dev and stuff like that. Like when I go to stand these things up, I'm like, this is almost the same as this. Like this React thing is almost like this Svelte thing, and like you can almost bounce between them all. Whereas like Angular 2 through Angular, I don't know how far I go up, it was wildly different with dependency injection, all that stuff, until the newer like independent components now are getting closer to like what React has. And I think to your point, like there's going to be this, oh, you have this cool thing, but then it gets implemented in your favorite framework anyways. We're kind of in that mode. So it's going to be a wild ride still.
Big time.
I found it interesting. I think a few people have done the reviews on the JS survey again. And I don't know if it's just across the industry or like what it is, but there's so much like negativeness in all the frameworks. They all kind of took a step back, I felt like, this year. And I don't know why. Do you have any opinions on that?
I really don't. Or at least I don't have any intuitions about it. I have a lot of thoughts about it. But I feel that we are... A lot of people say that the web is getting more complicated, right? And I don't know that I agree with that.
Ooh, hot take.
Yeah, this is kind of a like a spicy moment for me.
I like it.
I think that sufficiently complex software has always existed throughout all of computer history.
Sure.
Whether we're talking DOS, whether we're talking whatever, right? I think what is actually changing is not the complexity of software, but the expectation of the users for your software to meet a certain requirement, right?
I like that.
It's not that, the app I built 10 years ago was the worst thing in the world, but it's that my users didn't necessarily care if it didn't have translation in a couple languages or if it crashed every once in a while, right? Like I don't know if you used early Android phones in particular.
Oh
That
yeah,
was the wild, wild west of computers, right?
totally. Yeah,
Like you could get away with whatever you wanted.
your side,
Everything had an
your
app and all
yeah,
of them were terrible. You know what I mean?
and you were sideloading stuff you shouldn't be, and like everything else. Yeah,
Right. And nowadays there's this expectation for there to be a bit of refinement, right? For there to have been user testing, for there to have been, a color swatch and whatever, right? And I think that because we are getting more standardized and we are starting to see more expectations around software, I think that is what leads to a perception of more complex web, a more complex web that may not be the case.
yeah, and I wish I'd say this all the time, and like people correct me that there's like templates and repos out there, but I always feel like there's some frameworks that are trying to, and when I say framework, like full end-to-end frameworks that are trying to solve this, but there's no turn a switch and get the best thing, whatever it is, like solution, because every solution is different.
Right.
So if I say like, go pull this template and it has the best SEO and your lighthouse scores are all green and blah, blah, blah. And then someone says, oh, but we want this new AI feature in there. And you start loading that incorrectly and now it kills your page. Like every single time it's unique. We're not all just writing a blog. Like, I'm sorry.
Right.
Like there's complex applications across the board. And I think that's the perception, is that everything needs to be a Webflow or a whatever when you drop it in, because there's so much concern around A11Y and like this has to be right and the forms have to be right and this bug should never exist. We've been writing software for how many years? I think it's that perception that gets in people's minds, that it has to be like pixel perfect, nothing wrong, and like just out of the box, ready to go. If it was that way, the creativity of the web, I think, would just be dead and gone.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
I would hate that. So, okay, with that downtrodden note that I just dropped in there, any last minute thoughts on web dev fundamentals as we get going?
I mean, if you want to come check us out, we are Playful Programming, aka previously Unicorn Utterances.
I should ask you, when's that switching?
It's like this month, like this week.
Okay.
Even.
All right.
So that's why I'm mentioning the dual name, because otherwise you'll go live and then it'll be the wrong name in a week. It'll like, yeah, so you can find the book at framework.guide. The book is a little pricey. Some people might not be able to access it. It's free. It's $0.
That's so expensive.
I know, really prohibitive, but yeah, come check us out. We're volunteer based. We're trying to make the world better and help people learn programming. So framework.guide.
I love it. Yeah. So as he said, sorry, allergies today are killing me. As Corbin said, there's 3 books: Fundamentals, Ecosystem, and Internals. And Ecosystems and Internals are not out yet, but Ecosystems is getting really close. So stay tuned on that page as well, so you can get kind of the next update too. So now we're going to shift to the part of the show that I really enjoy, even though I've gotten comments, take this part out. I don't care. I love it. This is what I like to call perfect picks. And I'm going to let Corbin go first, because like, I don't even know what's happening in this thing. Tell us all about this.
All right. So I'm going to hold my headphones out for a second. I am an audio nerd. Like, look at the size of these are like the size of my head, right? These headphones are.
Love it.
So I'm an audio nerd, and while Spotify is about to come out with their hi-fi stuff and there's Tidal and whatever else, for me, there's nothing that beats like loading up an iPod or a phone or whatever with your own music files. No DRM, no nothing, right? So my favorite place to buy music is Qobuz, which provides like high quality, super FLAC, whatever you want to call them. They have basically every genre and every artist you can think of, and just elevates your music listening journey by having the ability to listen to it locally in high quality.
Now, are these like mainstream songs and things like that as well? Or is this kind of like people you haven't heard of, like on radio and stuff?
So one of my challenges with like Bandcamp is that like it's great. I love Bandcamp as a website, right? You can buy music from there. But you get like the really small indie creators, which is not bad. Like I love that stuff.
Yep.
This is like the mainstream music service that serves like no DRM, high quality music.
Interesting. Okay.
So
cool. I love it. My pick's oops, clicked on the wrong thing. My pick is a little nerdier, and what I mean by little is a whole lot. I was doing some comparison, I'll call it, between I'm totally dropping the name because I just read Fabric. What is the other multi-platform that Google has? It's non-JavaScript. Oh my gosh.
Dart,
Flutter. But
Flutter?
what's built on top of it?
Flutter.
Flutter, thank you.
Yeah.
After I read a word like Fabric that has an F, I totally missed the other word.
Yeah.
Flutter. Okay. So I was comparing Flutter to some other like Canvas-based stuff, and I ran into this like Fabric.js, and the API surrounding this thing is super simple and like surprisingly light. So like here's the quick start that you can get into, but let me see if I can find. There we go. So like that's kind of all it takes to write it in React, to kind of play around with the canvas, drop things onto it. And I found it like amazingly simple to create. There's like the material UI based Flutter kind of layout to create it in React just by using this. And so I went and checked. There's a couple algos out there that have like the speed and frame rate refresh, and this was by far faster. And so I was like, what am I missing here? And I'm sure there's tons and tons of functionality that I'm like missing and not checking, but I thought it was a cool little library to check out and use against it. So definitely check out fabric.js GitHub page. I think there's a website. I'll Google quickly. Maybe. Yes. fabricjs.com as well. So check that out. It's pretty cool. Corbin, thanks for sitting down and chatting with WebDev Fundamentals. I can't wait to read your super expensive book of $0 and kind of see what you're working on next, especially in TanStack. Love that area. So
yeah, thanks for having me.
You're going to come back on, right?
Oh yeah, easy.
Okay, good. All right. We'll talk to you next time. See you.
All right. See ya.